Iventoy. So it's taking the Ventoy solution from a standard USB and moving it into a PXE boot environment. Recently, Techno Tim done a video where he done network.xyz, and this is what kind of prompted me to have a look to see if this could also be done with Ventoy, because to be honest, I love XYZ. I've actually managed to deploy that myself and it works absolutely stonkingly, but there is some extra steps needed to host Windows files. So I wanted something a little bit more similar to Ventoy. And as I self-host my ISOs anyway and keep them on my TrueNAS, it seemed like a logical step to see if there was an opportunity to actually leverage the power of Ventoy on a PXE boot scenario. Now, like Tim, myself, I grew up a lot using PXE, particularly in my early days in IT, where pretty much everything was managed that way and everything was done via PXE boot, whether it be a Acronis True Image, Norton Ghost, any kind of fault finding tools that we used at the time, all were used using PXE boot. So to actually self-host one of these in my own environment, again, like Tim's mentioned, is quite exciting. And it's something that kind of takes me back a little bit. So let's stay tuned. Now, how we're going to do this is using Ubuntu server. I'm absolutely going to go through the whole stage for you. I have got other videos out there at the moment that kind of show you how to build an Ubuntu server, but I thought I'd go from step to step because, to be honest, it's not that complicated. So let's talk about Iventoy, and let's just start off with the website. It will look very familiar to those that have used Ventoy in the past. So we can go on here, we can see exactly what it's about. We can look in the download section and find what the latest version is. So we see at the moment it is 109p1, something to bear in mind when we come to a bit later. There's also a bit of documentation there, what tested ISOs, and if you need to go to the forums or donations or frequently asked questions, it's all absolutely there. So primarily what we're going to be doing though is obviously getting ourselves set up, ready to go. So what we're going to do is create a VM, and you can do this many different ways. You could in theory just do this in Windows. However, what I want to do is just host this on a Ubuntu server, because then I can turn it on and off as I like. So let's have it local. We need to pick the latest version of Ubuntu, which I've got there, and then we'll just go through the standard setups. Now we can use default CBIOS, absolutely fine. Disks, what we'll do is just send that to a local LVM, or sorry, that one there, the ZFS pool, and I'll make that 20. Now with Iventoy, you do need to be aware that it will only boot in without secure boot on. So when you actually do the original boot section, you will need to turn off secure boot. I imagine in the future maybe they'll be able to address that, but at the moment it's just something to be aware of. I'm not going to give this a massive amount of memory, but the reason I'm building it on this machine is because it's got access to a 10 gig network, which is nice from that perspective. So yeah, I'm just going to build that. I'm just going to go back to CPU and change that to host, and then click through. And that's going to create the VM. So if you've ever watched any of the other videos that I've done previously on how to set up Ubuntu, we'll go through some simple steps to begin with. What we'll do is just get this up and running. We will need to make some configuration changes as well to our DHCP server, which mine is in Unify. So we'll get to that. Just a simple case of doing the install as you would normally. So we'll just wait till this boots up, and then we'll get prompted with a load of questions that we just need to fill in, which is pretty much then up to you how you set this one up. I'm going to give this server certain names. I'm certainly going to call it Iventoy just to make life a little bit easier. So for me, English UK, update to the new installer. And here we go. So done. I'm not going to use the minimize. I'll get my IP address there. It's worth keeping a note of that. So 32192 for myself. I will set that as static later on, just to make sure that it never changes. It shouldn't do anyway, because the way my Unify works, but we won't take any chances. And then we'll just let this grab all the package lists and use the entire disks. We're only using 20 gig for this because we're not actually going to host the files on here. What we're going to do is connect them in. My name, there we are. server's name, Iventoy, username, password, and password again. And done. Do I want to use Ubuntu Pro? I'm not going to on this occasion, but I might do it later. So definitely want SSH, and done, and then none of that at the moment. And then we'll just let it crack on. Now what I'll do is speed this video up because we're now going to be sitting here waiting for some time. Okay, so we're at the stage of rebooting. We'll just give it a quick reboot. And what we'll do is basically get ready to use something like PuTTY. Now you will always see this when you try to unmount in Proxmox. Now this is because the CD-ROM is currently running. So all we need to do is go into hardware, in CD device there, click do not use any media, click OK, go back to here, and then hit enter, and it will then happily do what you want it to do. So there's a couple of things we'll run when this boots up that we want to just do before we actually get any further. Some of them are around just doing some bits. So we've got to a stage where we can log in. So let's log in. And that should log us in. And it will start to do some other bits and initialize some other parts as we're doing this. So not to worry about those. You'll probably see my SSH keys that I've blurred out. And we'll just do an echo to clear that. Okay, so we're logged in. I'm just going to increase the font size on here because some feedback I've had over the past has been that it's been a bit too small. Apologies, I do usually record on a 4K screen, which probably doesn't help at times when doing this. So I'll try and make it a little bit bigger while going through this activity. Oh, that's quite big enough. Let's go a little bit higher than that as well. Let's go to 12. I will have to resize this window a little bit. Right, okay, there we go. So what we're going to do, I'll just drag this down a bit so you can still see what's going on at the top there. So what we're going to do is just run some simple commands. First one is a just standard sudo one to do updates. It's going to want my password first time. You can go and add yourself to the sudo group. It's up to you. Personally, I actually like the fact that I don't always have sudo permissions about the password. So it's just my way of doing it. And then we'll just do an upgrade, and it will find a couple of the bits on there, I'm sure, which we'll just let it run through. It won't take a moment. Now we could go next straight into deploying Iventoy. What we're going to do, however, is add some of the prereq stuff that we need, which is to do with SMB. So we're going to install CIF utils, mainly because we're going to want to be able to mount certain parts in here. So I will grab that next once this is finished, and then we'll go through that activity. Now the reason for this is you can do this a couple of ways. You could absolutely have all your files hosted on here, but obviously then what you'd be doing is running a server with a larger footprint, and then obviously moving the ISOs onto this Ubuntu server. I, however, want to basically just mount a Samba share over the network, which would do exactly the same thing. Now how we'll do that is just using a credentials file and some other stuff just to ease it up a little bit. Okay, and just restart that service. Now that should be good to go. We'll just clear the screen and start again so we can see what we're doing. Right, so that's done. Now what we're going to do is install the Samba utilities using CIFS utils. So again, the commands will all be either on my website or in the description below. So we'll just run that off. That will install Samba. Now at this point what we're probably going to want to do is restart, so reboot the server just to make sure everything's pulled across, and then what we'll do is go through the next steps, which will be to basically build out some bits. Now what we could do here, I suppose, is before we get too carried away, Let's see where we are. I think if I go cd /, I'll actually bring this up here. Pardon me, I'll just edit, clear that screen. So where we are, we're in our home directory. This is where I want to be. So I just did a cd ... to come back. Now this is where I want to make my SMB credentials file. So I do, let's exit out. So all I'm going to do is use the following command and then create the username and password bit. So all I'm going to do is copying, like I said, the credential file values that we need. So it can be the following. I'm not going to use domain, so I'm going to take domain out. However, I'm going to need to make sure I use username and password. And save that file. Now the next step would be to add cmod 600 to that, which I've just done, and then we're good to go. So all I'm going to do at this point now is reboot the machine, and it'll probably want me to sudo reboot just to get it up and running. Now you can see here what's going on, and then I'll reconnect in and we'll do the remaining steps that need to happen. So we're back in and ready to go. Now what we need to do now is just basically deploy Iventoy to the machine. So we do that by using the following commands. And again, these will be linked. Now I will explain some of these. So before I actually commit that, this part here, this versioning, that will obviously change as releases go up. So if you're doing this later on and there's a new version, you can always check GitHub in that location, or what you can do is obviously look at the Iventoy website and go from there. But basically I'm going to grab that. So that will pull that down. And then what I'm going to then do is basically unzip that file. So just using the following command again, let's run that, and that should have done it. So if I do an ls, what we should do now is see that we've got the zip file, which is the one in red, and the Iventoy, which we'll cd into. So let's cd into Iventoy 1.0.19. And if we do an ls now, you'll see we've got the following directory. Now what we're interested in is the ISO file, because this is where we need to host our ISOs. So like I said, you could now, if you wanted to, put all your ISOs in there. I, however, are going to do this slightly differently because I've got them hosted elsewhere. So what I'm basically going to do is mount a drive on that ISO location. So how I'm going to do that is quite straightforward, really. All we'll need to do is run the following. So I'm going to basically edit the fs tab file, again using the following command. So just a sudo nano etc fs tab, and it will want my password. I'll apply that, and then you'll know that you've opened the right one because you'll get something in here. Now all I need to apply is my elements that I'm using. Yours will vary, but I will step through it as it currently works. So how this works is this very first part here is basically the location of where your files are hosted. So this is my TrueNAS, and then what we've got then is basically where I want to host it. So mine, as you would have seen, is at home, ExpressIT, Iventoy, that ISOs. We're using CIFS, and then I'm basically telling it to look for the SMB credentials file. So that in itself is good. So all we need to do now is do a save on that and come out. Now to test that, simple as sudo mount /a. And if you don't get any failures, that is usually a good sign. Now to prove it's actually worked, what we can do is cd into ISO, do an ls, and there you can see all of the images that I currently have hosted in there. So you can just see some of them in here, Linux mints, etc. All of those ready to go. So I've done that step. Now what do I do to actually get this thing working? Well, all I'm going to do is back out, and there is a simple command to basically start Iventoy. And it is as simple as this. Again, we'll need sudo. So we'll just put sudo in front and the following command. Now all that's doing is with the R command, it's basically saying that it will auto start. So it's basically setting it up as a service. That will then run, and you'll see you'll get this nice little bit at the bottom here to say you can navigate this way, which is obviously a loopback address, or use your HTTP. Now we happen to know that we are running on 32.192 and we want 2600. So what we're going to do is go 192, 168, 32.192 and port 2600. And there we are. We are now at the stage where we have Iventoy hosted and running. Now, this is where you need to take a few more steps. Now, the first step is to go into configuration. Now, I'm going to be using an external DHCP mode. Now, the difference between the two, so it's helpful to everybody else, is you've got a few options here. External net, I think, comes from outside. Internal basically means that it'll be using DHCP that Iventoy can offer, which you can absolutely do. This is where the kind of free bit works because it will only give you those 20 DHCP leases. If you want to go by the Pro, you'll get a lot more. I'm not quite sure how the free edition would work if you're externally hosted. Be interested. I might try out more than 20 at once, see what happens. But for me, I'm going to be setting external because I'm going to be using external bit. Don't really need to change the boot UI here, and I'm just going to save that configuration. Now, the other bits that we need to look at is in image management, and you'll see it's found mine already because I've already mounted it. So it can see them all here. I'm quite happy with that. You can click on the left for details and it tells you a little bit, and you can set some parameters here. So if you want to set some additional scripts, you absolutely can. If you need to imply bias passwords and that kind of thing, you can do that as well. So there's some nice little options here too. And you can also set some as a default boot file as well. So it'll basically head to that. So everything's working, you would think. Yes, right? Okay. Now, let me just point something out. If I go to Unify now, because what I need to do is adapt my machine to work with that that PXE boot. So I'm going to just find my Unify dashboard and I'm going to bring it over. So let's just drag that over. And we'll go into settings and into our network. Now, our network itself, what I need to do, if I go into default and go towards the bottom here, into scope options, this is what's important. So this network boot here, I've got to point this to the right address. So 192, that's going to be. And then this part is basically the boot file. And it's going to always be Iventoy loader 1600. And we'll just click apply changes. And that should absolutely work for us now. Now, if I wanted to do more than one network, I could obviously do my VM one the same. You'll see these have been done from when I've been using network XYZ. So I'll just change that. But I might want to leave that one. So if I wanted to continue to use that, that's a good way to keep a bit of variance between the two. However, because I'm just going to do this for a test purpose, at the moment, I'm going to change this one to the Iventoy loader as well. So let's click apply changes. That's done. Right, let's remove that. So that's everything on that side is absolutely done. Now, if I go back here, what I did earlier is I built a test machine. Now, this test machine, just so that you're aware, is basically planned out to boot off the network. So if we look at the boot order, it's going to network first. So the idea is it will see that PXE boot and it will run. Well, that's what it should do in theory. Now, if I start this up, we'll see what happens because I've not finished configuring Iventoy. But I wanted to show you this because I've seen a lot of people have this exact problem. So it looks like it's going to start. So it can see the file name, it can see the loader. But what will happen is it will just time out. And I will let it time out. There we go. So you can see connection timed out, no more network devices. And it will keep going through a boot cycle. Now, all we need to do actually is in the Iventoy, under here, there's a big play button. So all you need to do is click this start. Now, when you click start, that's now started the service. And when I go back here, you can now see Iventoy is loaded. So wonderfully, all of a sudden now I've got Iventoy up and running. So how does it work? Let's just show you. So pretty much similar way that we've worked before. Let's pick Windows 10 or 11, sorry. And what it's going to do is boot up Windows 11. Now, obviously, if I was going to deploy this to a virtual machine, I wouldn't do it this way because I'd need to have the Vert.io drivers and various other stuff to make it work. So I wouldn't use Windows this way, for example. However, if I was booting a machine off a desk, for example, like a laptop, I could absolutely use this approach because obviously it will pull down all of the correct drivers. Now this is quite nice from that respect because now I don't need to worry about having that USB 10, 11, whatever disk available to hand, because let's be honest, most of the time, as I think Tim mentioned in his video, we all lose where the USB sticks are and completely forget which ones are which and does it have the right version of Windows on, etc. The only thing that we need to be aware of in this is actually making sure that we've got the very latest ISOs on here, which I wonder if there's a way to automate, and I'll start to look at that at some point. So the advantages this has over XYZ is that it's got a really simple approach to just doing it. XYZ in itself will do pretty much all of the Linux stuff seamlessly. When it comes to Windows, you need to do a little bit more work, so it's just something to be aware of. But there we are. That is how you deploy Iventoy. So there we are. That is how to deploy Iventoy on an Ubuntu server, self-hosted within Proxmox. Now the beauty of it is most of us home labbers will have something like TrueNAS or Synology that we're already hosting files on. So it's quite an easy step for us to actually just mount the drive and pass through that SMB by mounting it within that environment to enable us to have access to all of our ISOs. Now the great thing is this is a little bit easier to set up the network.xyz just on the Windows front, because you don't have to go and build a pre-built environment to actually deploy Windows. That being said, both of them work seamlessly well, and I will probably both run them in tandem, just turning one on and off at a different time, or maybe just having a separate VLAN to do that. And one of the discussions of VLANs, I think one thing that's really important to note, if you're going to use the internal side of it and not use the external DHCP side, it's probably worth setting up an independent VLAN to basically host those maximum of 20 clients in, because what you could do is set a static IP on your host and then have the other 20 available through there, but at least they're then segregated into their own environment area. If you have liked this video, do me a massive favor please and just hit the subscribe or the like or even a comment. Just let me know how you're using it, and even about your experiences of using PXE boot. I'd be really interested to hear all the tales from years gone by on exactly what you use PXE boot for. But needless to say, no longer need one of them.